Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, great. Well, so it's in, I think, equal measure, humbled, grateful, nervous to give this presentation today, and I really hope this is useful to you all. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Tarun. I co-run the UK office. For those of you who do know me, something you might not know about me is that I've been on the customer services, EPP, and merchant team through my 3.5 years here at NextJump. So a lot of interactions with external-facing sides of the business. And one of the things that comes up most frequently is this notion of objections. And I characterize objections as the words we don't want to hear. And that applies to every aspect of our lives, right? Whether it is, asking a girl on a date and her saying no, right? Or whether that's, your kids not doing your homework, or whether that's clients getting pushback on commercials and terms. And this is what I'm going to cover today. And in fact, when I was putting this presentation together, something didn't quite sit right with me, was the notion of, I didn't like the subject, dealing with objections, because I feel like you deal with pest control, and you deal with taxes, and you deal with your utility bills, and it's like, it gives the impression that you're trying to overcome things. It's like a conflict, it's a fight. And the mindset change I want to talk to you about today is how do you change being from this winning, I've got to win this objection, or I've got to win this situation, to finding solutions and really seeing the opportunity. It's viewing it, perceiving this as a gift. So with that, this is the third presentation in the sales skills training so far. So Greg did the first one around building credibility from the outset. Stephanie then did Exploring the Unknown, where she covered a lot about setting up the environment correctly. And today I'm going to talk to you about embracing the objections. So today's agenda, over the last 6 months, Greg and I in particular have spent a lot of time observing others through sales situational workshops. And the two common patterns that have come up the most, and there's also two common patterns that I think I've struggled with the most at NextJump for the last 4 years, where I can extract learnings and hopefully help. Those are, so number one, what are the questions you hate to answer? Which I'll come on to more in more detail. And number two is, how do you deal with a no? How do you deal with rejection? So I appreciate that this looks like Jackie, but I can assure you that it's not. It's just a random photo. And the question I want to ask you today is, what are the questions you hate to answer in life? I just want you to think about that for a second. The questions you hate to answer, the questions you avoid, the questions you hide behind, the questions that you really wish someone doesn't ask you. You go into a meeting, you go into a situation, and you're like, I just wish they don't ask me that question. Right? Think about those questions in your life, whether it's at home, whether it's with clients, in business. What are those questions? And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And I'm going to go start off with a personal story for me of a question that I hate answering. And so 2 years ago, I was 23, and we were negotiating working with Priceline, one of our biggest merchant partners. And at the time, we were just working with them in the US. And I was trying to leverage that relationship for a global partnership. So their CEO, their COO, and their team came down to London, and flew down from Canada to London to meet with me. And the conversation, we had the meeting, it started well. And all of a sudden, they go, we're talking about our backgrounds. And I was like, well, I've been at NextJump ever since I started, straight from college. And, the CEO goes to me, well, how old are you? And I froze. I absolutely froze. I thought, in my mind, I was like, well, I'm 23. If I tell him my age, it's going to ruin credibility. No one's going to take me seriously. And I remember coming up with an answer, I kind of panicked a bit, and I was like, how old do you think I am? And it was very awkward. It was a very awkward situation. And the irony of it all is that I avoided that question because I didn't want to lose credibility. But in reality, I lost credibility because I couldn't answer that question. And I was scared, I avoided the question, and I was running away from fear. And I think this is a common mistake we make as next jumpers for these questions. We try and sweep them under the rug, right? We don't prepare, even though we know they're coming. And we try and talk around the situation, particularly for the more arrogant of us. We say, well, we get these questions, we can try and talk around them. But this presentation isn't about me. And actually, in the build-up to this, I've reached out to several next jumpers, and thank you for all of you who kind of contributed to this, for the questions we hate to answer collectively. And there are a few interesting ones, so I'll go through them. What's the worst thing about working at Next Jump? A recruiting question, or we might get an academy. How much energy do you put onto mobile? Can I control the emails you send to our employees? What are your hours like? Can you guarantee us inclusion in an email? Are you a cult? And the last one is particularly my favorite one. How are babies made? Which was asked by one of the parents, the Next Jump parents. So these are questions we collectively hate answering them and we avoid them. And what I want to talk to you about are the lessons I've learned and hopefully a framework we can use to approach these questions. So the key learning, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. It's the notion that you actually win the meeting before the meeting happens. And that's, I think, a key learning is that you don't talk around these things. It comes through the preparation. It comes through the build-up. And how can you turn these questions into proactively addressing them and using them as an opportunity, seeing them as an opportunity to build credibility and build a relationship? So if there's nothing else you take away from today, there's nothing else you take away from what I talk about today, please take away this. It's an approach of it's a very simple framework for how to approach difficult questions. So number one is to preempt the question. You're going into a situation and you know certain questions are going to come up. Preempt the question. What are the questions you're going to get? Number two is to answer. And obviously, to come up with the most creative solutions you can possibly come up with. Brainstorm as many answers as you can. And give it some serious thought. Number three is to then go back and reevaluate the weak answers. Go and pinpoint, this is actually in the wrong order. So answer and be creative, but then get critical feedback. So that's meant to be number three. Critical feedback from people you trust, people who are going to poke holes and rip your answers to shreds. And then you reevaluate the weak answers and try again. And lastly, it's practice. So I'm going to go through an example. When I reached out to Next Jumpers, the one that came up most frequently was the question of what's the worst thing about working at Next Jump? And that's a difficult question, whether it's in a recruitment setting or whether that is an academy, or irrespective of if you're working at Next Jump or not, it's a difficult question to address. Like, what's the worst thing about your job? So I took a crack at using this approach, and hopefully it's helpful. And this framework is not just about this question, but about every question in any walk of life. So number one is to preempt the question. So I've written down the question there. Number two is to answer and be creative. So we came up with creative, kind of different answers. One of the things I hate about working at Next Jump is dancing when I have two left feet, right? Or feeling like I'm the stupidest person in the room. Or more answers. We're a fast-moving company with so many moving parts, it's difficult to say no to opportunities. And these are the initial answers that, in the build-up to this, that I put together. But this is the most important step, getting critical feedback from people you trust who are going to rip them to shreds, who are going to poke holes in them. And you can see that some of them have been crossed out. It says lacks authenticity, it's too scripted, too trivial. Other ones need more examples, they need more context. And then you reevaluate the answers. So for example, we're a fast-moving company with so many moving parts, it's hard to say no to opportunities. And I've had to learn a lot about prioritization and how to say no, which is uncomfortable for me, but it's been a learning experience. And that answer's all of a sudden a lot more stronger than the one they initially have, and there's some more answers there. And it still might not be the right one, but you can practice on clients, you can in a kind of above the waterline situation, and you can see engaged reaction for how that answer goes. But all of a sudden, you're a lot more prepared going into it. And the stage you want to get to is when you're not fearful of that question. That question that you were avoiding, the question that you were running away from, that you were hoping people weren't asking you, once you start practicing and going through this framework, you can get to a position where you're comfortable and you can answer it with conviction. And that fear turns to confidence, where you're calling out the elephant in the room. So, for example, if you are going back to that example, if you are having an interview and you know with a potential next jump and you know that question's coming, you want to get to a stage where you're so comfortable with the answer, you can say, well, one of the things I often get asked is what's the worst thing about working at next jump, and here's how I address it. So it's turning that fear to confidence with this framework. So the second thing I want to talk about is how do you deal with a no? And if you think of the first part of difficult questions and the questions we hate answering as preparation going into a meeting, dealing with a no is what happens when you're in this situation. And an interesting data point is I was reading a study, and on average in sales, someone says no 5 times before they buy. So think about that for a second. How do you react when you get a no? And I'm going to go through a worked example. So imagine you are at a careers fair, right? Well, it's another recruiting example, but this could apply not just to recruiting, but to clients or to merchants. And you're speaking to a really talented candidate, one you really want to work with. And they say, you're talking to them for 20 minutes, and they say, well, next jump, it sounds great, but I'm not sure if it's the right place for me. What's your first reaction? What's the first thing you say? So just think about that for a second. If you're in that situation, it could be recruiting, or it could even be a client who says, I don't have time for this right now. What's your first answer? Okay, but I'm going to pick on someone in the audience. Someone shout out what's your first answer would be? Well, your first, okay, why? Okay. Anything else?
If it's not the right time, when would be?
When would be the right time? Okay. So jumping into the questions, right, which is natural. And I know you're speaking this about with call you out, Kevin earlier as well, and he said, well, try and talk them out of it as well. So 2 common mistakes when we get a no or we get a kind of an objection is that we'll be defensive. We'll say, well, actually, we've got a free gym membership and we've got free laundry, so we should jump in. The second thing, it's good to be inquisitive, but there's a step before that. So there's a step before the why. There's a step before asking questions. And on the insecure side, it's taking that no as face value, saying, well, I've got a no, and now I'm going to walk away. Right? That's fine. And I think the first step, so I'm going to go through, again, another approach for dealing with no, or rather embracing no, is the first step is empathy. Show that you're listening and show that you're not going to argue. So, for example, in that case, before saying why, before asking questions, before trying to talk someone out of the situation, saying, well, I know you must be very busy right now, and actually finding your first job out of university is one of the most difficult decisions you're going to have to make. And it shows that you're not going to argue, it diffuses the situation, and that point is often missed, the empathy point. And it's a mistake I make all the time. Go straight into trying to fix the problem. Go straight into trying to find out why, versus just showing that you understand the situation. Number 2 is the question, and be naturally inquisitive to find out why. And it comes with asking the right type of questions, and that's very important. Something also you can preempt. So in this case, for example, the reason you want to question is that they've said that, okay, I'm not sure next jump's the right place for me, but that could be for a whole host of reasons. It could be a lack of knowledge. For example, they don't know what next jump does. It could be for a specific warranted concern, like they don't have a visa, right? It could be because of a misconception, like we only hire engineers, right? So there's a whole host of reasons why they could be saying no. So ask, probe, confirm, and if you ask the right question, something like, well, what kind of career are you looking for? Like, what are your aspirations? Because you've empathized at the beginning, sometimes you get they're more inclined to open up to you and say, well, I understand that NextJump's been around for 20 years, and what I'm actually looking for is more of a startup vibe. And then you've extracted information that you didn't have before, and you can use that to address the situation, and you can use that to come up with solutions, because you understand them at a much deeper level than if you went straight into why, because maybe they wouldn't have opened up, or asked the wrong sort of questions. So those are the two main things I wanted to cover today. The first being the difficult questions and the approach for handling different questions, and the second being dealing with no. And to summarize, if there's two things I would like, and I hope that you take away from today. So number one is to proactively attack the questions you hate to answer, using the framework that we discussed. So preempt the question, answer and be creative, receive critical feedback, evaluate weak answers, and practice. That's the first thing. And the second is to respond and not react when you hear a no. And that means starting with empathy, versus going straight into questioning or addressing the situation. And I think from my time at NextJump, over the last 3.5 years, these are honestly the situations, the places where I've made the most mistakes. Often will be very defensive, go straight into answering, trying to solve things, won't listen, lack empathy, and so I try to extract and draw upon my personal experiences to hopefully help in areas of sales and recruitment and every aspect of our lives. So with that, I'd just like to thank you. I'd like to thank everyone who gave me feedback, particularly Stephanie, Jackie, Kevin, Chris, Greg. Really appreciate that, and I hope it was helpful. And I look forward to, I think there's a cute question and answer session now, so thank you.